You know, I don't think it's fair. I don't. I think they should be exposed to both methods and have the opportunity to try both methods, and whichever method is good for them. They can do both. They can do one or the other, but I think it's better if they know both. But that's just my little opinion. But to only be exposed to one and not the other, I think is unfair considering today's world and environment. And when I first read this book, I thought it was just this particular time period. But in researching ASL, well, reacquainting myself with ASL, I've discovered that it is still done today. And that kind of bugs me a little bit. So, welcome to the D. Louise book series. I'm Christina, K-R-I-S-T-I-N-A, and this is where we read books, talk about books, recap books, spoil books. And it's nice to meet you. I am trying to learn my sign language again very, very slowly, microscopically slowly. And we are talking about Murder on Lexington Avenue, book 12 in the Victoria Thompson Gaslight series. Excuse me. I do not know what that was about. So, this is book 12 in the series, and I am enjoying the heck out of this series. And this book brings up, let me just wait a second. So, this book brings up something that I didn't realize was still prevalent today. So we will talk about that a little bit. But we want to know who killed Mr. Wooten. Was it the embezzler? Was it the wife's lover? Was it the daughter's lover? Did she really have a lover? Was it the son? Was it the business partner? Was it the son of the business partner? Or was it someone else entirely? Yes, ma'am. Frank gets called to a crime scene. He has been asked for by name. And he doesn't know who would be calling him to a crime scene by name, but he goes anyway, well, except for like maybe Sarah Brandt, and it's not her. And Sarah Brandt is a midwife. She's also daughter of Elizabeth and Felix Decker, who are very, 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 very wealthy peoples. And because of an estrangement, and that's pretty much over now, and there was a lot of backstory that pertained to the last book, so you'll have to check that out. But she also has two semi-adopted daughters, Catherine and Maeve, and Miss Ellsworth is her neighbor. Miss Ellsworth has a son, Nelson, who we don't see. We've seen a little, we hear about him a lot. He was prevalent in one book heavily, but he will be prevalent again in later books. And then we have her parents. We don't see too much of them in this book, just Mr. Decker. So, but there's a lot of stuff in here that I want to talk about, and I will spoil almost the entire, I won't tell you who done it, but in my recapping of the books, I like to get into them. So Frank goes to the crime scene, and he'd been asked for by name, and he greets the ward detective Sullivan, and it was Mr. Edward Higginbottom who asked for Frank. And he asked for Frank because he knows Frank, because Brian, his kid, goes to his school. The Institution for Improved Instruction of Deaf Mutes on Lexington Avenue. And the dead guy is Nehemiah Wooten. And Mr. Wooten had some ideas that we are going to talk about, because I would have punched the guy in the face. Hypothetically, of course. He had some loose brain cells, and according to the world, so does Alexander Graham Bell have a few loose brain cells. He might have been brilliant in some things, but his personal thinking was off the rocker. So Mr. Higginbottom says that Mr. Wooten was a broker. He helped companies who made products to find customers. Commercials maybe? Newspaper advertising maybe? You could do it yourself. So he says Wooten wanted to talk to him about his daughter Electra. Electra is deaf, and she's I forget how to do it. It's like something 1, 2, 3. It's 16. I forget how to do it. I used to be an interpreter for like 5 minutes way back when. And her father, she was learning how. Hey, let's back up here. Well, we're gonna get into this a few times, because it's very pertinent to the story, and I didn't think about it till I was into the book. But Electra is deaf, and she's 16, and she was sent to the New York no, not that one. She was sent to this one school, and I'm gonna get to that in a minute. But she was dating a teacher from the New York Institute for the Deaf and Dumb. And there was a difference between the two institutes. And I need to find the name of that other one. I'm really annoyed with myself that I didn't write it down. But the one school that I can't remember the name of believed in only teaching deaf children how to read lips. And the other school believes in doing sign language. And I think sign language is the better way to go. But I think it wouldn't hurt to be able to read a little bit of lips, to use both methods of communication. Because sign language would allow you to communicate with a lot of people. And learning lips would also learn to teach a lot of people. And I recently saw this video about this girl who said that she wasn't aware of sign language till she was 18 and moved and was in college before she learned about sign language. And that's totally unfair. That's totally, totally, totally unfair. I think sign language, they would be able to pick up more words. I've heard that they miss quite a bit. If you come to somebody who's got an accent or speaks differently or doesn't speak slowly enough, I think having sign language as a backup would be good, or knowing sign language and having lip reading as a backup would be good. But Mr. Wooten believed in you see, the young man Electra wishes to marry is also deaf, and Wooten didn't want her to marry a deaf man. Frank asked, a little surprised. He'd met some deaf couples in the past year who seemed very happy together. It was more than that, Higginbottom hastened as he explained. Mr. Wooten was a student of eugenics. What is eugenics? I'm not sure of the exact definition, but Mr. Wooten believed that human race should be improved by eliminating people with certain flaws. Flaws? You mean like being deaf? Yes. Are you saying that that Wooten believed deaf people should be killed? Oh, no, not at all. His own daughter is deaf after all. Then what did he want to eliminate them? He didn't think deaf people should marry each other so they wouldn't produce deaf children. His fear was that intermarriage of deaf people would produce an entire race of deaf people. And they go on to explain that a lot of deaf people have hearing kids, a lot of hearing kids have deaf children. It that has nothing to do with it. But apparently, this man had bought into the theory. Heavily, massively, severely, head over heels into the theory. Um, I have to say that I have not observed this to be true. In fact, only a few of the children in our school even have one deaf parent, and only one has parents who are both deaf. Even your son has one hearing parent, too. My wife wasn't deaf either, Frank informed him. Then why do you think deaf people shouldn't marry? I don't think anything. I was merely explaining to you what Mr. Wooten believed. Then you don't believe in this, what was that word? Eugenetics? Eugenics. No, I don't. Where did Wooten get an idea like that, then? From Alexander Graham Bell. He attended one of Bell's lectures on this subject. Bell, the man who invented the telephone? What does he have to do with this? Mr. Bell is interested in helping the deaf. Both his wife and his mother are deaf, you see. In fact, his research into hearing devices is which led to the invention of the telephone. The curse of modern life, Frank said in disgust. Wait 100 years. Sometimes so Bell set out to help the deaf, and now he wants to stop them from marrying each other so they don't make more deaf people. I don't mean to sound critical of Mr. Bell or Mr. Wooten for that matter. Both men are good. They only want the best for the deaf people. It's just, well, I'm sure you understand how headstrong young people can be. Especially when they think they're in love, Frank agreed. What did Wooten expect you to do about his daughter's romance? I'm not sure, Higginbottom said. We were going to discuss it today. Who was this boy she was in love with? I don't know his name. Isn't he a student at your school? No. He's actually a teacher at another school, the New York Institution for the Deaf and the Dumb. That school teaches sign language, Frank said. Yes, it does. And the Lexington Avenue school taught students to speech read and speech and didn't allow them to use signs. I think they need to be allowed to use signs. So Frank goes to Mrs. Wooten's residence to inform her of the death of her husband, and she really doesn't seem all that upset about the situation. Apparently, her and her husband have been estranged for many years. Her husband was disappointed in her. Apparently, she'd had one child successfully. One child was stillborn, and then Electra was born deaf. And her husband refused to be active with her in that way. He did not want to have any more deaf children or any, those kind of kids. And so they had been separate. So Frank goes to talk to her, and Electra says, so they go to the house, and I'm trying to figure out this. So they go to the house, and the mother isn't all that upset about her husband being dead, and his daughter Electra, the deaf girl, thinks it's good that he's dead. At first, she's not really grieving, and that disturbs Frank just a little bit. And the servant tells him a few things, and then Frank goes to speak to the partner, Terrence Young, who gives him the impression that he didn't like Wooten and that no one else did. And then Frank heads home. Frank heard the clatter of running feet on the stairs the moment he entered the familiar tenement building. His son Brian was running to meet him. He paused, savoring the sound of his son running, something he wondered if he'd ever get used to, and then the sight of him. His small face was alight with happiness as he jumped the last 3 steps straight into Frank's arms. The boy was born with a club foot, and he was like that for almost 3 years, until Sarah Brandt referred Frank to a doctor that could do corrective surgery. Now, Brian still walks with a limp, but he is now able to walk, and all parties are thrilled. No, there was nothing simple about Brian's mind at all, Frank thought, as the boy pushed away and began frantically signing something to him. He recognized the sign for grandmother, but not much else. He set Brian on the steps and took one of his hands to indicate they should go upstairs. Brian frowned. He knew Frank couldn't understand his new language, and he didn't like it one bit. And that's another thing. Frank is the last one to learn sign language. Sarah Brandt will learn some of it. Maeve will learn quite a bit of it. Catherine will learn a ton of it. But Frank is like one of the last ones to learn the language. Even Sarah's parents at some point down the road will learn the sign language. And Frank will still be having trouble with the sign language. And he should be making a point to learn the sign language. I know, but I just couldn't tear myself away from all the hoochie-coochie dancers at the theater, Frank said seriously as he could manage. His mother's eyes grew wide with shock for a few seconds before she realized he was teasing her. She did not like being teased. What a thing to say in front of the boy. And Frank's like, he can't hear me. Do you have anything for me to eat? Of course I do. And then the boy is signing him again, and apparently Brian has brought home a puzzle from school, and he wants Frank to watch him put together the puzzle. And so they talk about that, and I always enjoy these scenes with Brian. And then Frank talks to his mother about the teacher that a lecturer is seeing, Mr. Oldham. Apparently he's deaf and he went to college, and apparently, as in today's standards, and even though we've got all these laws about equal rights and all that kind of stuff, you do know that some places in this country get away with paying the handicapped wages differently from normal people. My mentally handicapped or mentally challenged, or whatever the new term is yearly. When he was born, it was called TMR for trainable. Now, later it was mentally challenged or mentally disabled, or however you want to look at it. He was working for Goodwill, and the normal Goodwill peoples were making $7 an hour back when minimum wage was like $65. This was like years ago. So things could have changed by now, but this was well over almost 20 years ago. He was making $3.65 an hour. He was doing a ton of work, physical work, but he was making $3.65 because that's how Goodwill felt. And then somewhere along the line, when he was let go because Goodwill had decided to let go all the handicapped people and hire senior citizens. But like I said, this was over 20 years ago. Their practices have probably changed since then. But like I said, that I just thought that was so unfair way back when. And then he got a really good job, and then he got an even better job. But then his behavior became an issue, so he's currently unemployed. So he talks to his mother about Mr. Oldham, the teacher. She knows him. She's familiar with him. And she also explains to Frank that he is paid half the pay that the other teachers in the school are because he's deaf. And they figure he doesn't know, there's nothing he can do about it because jobs for the deaf are limited. And apparently it's been explained that in this time and age, deaf people could work in industries where hearing people could, but they would lose their hearing due to loud machine noise. So it seems that these companies that had loud working machine, printing presses, stuff like that use loud machines, they preferred deaf people because then deaf people's hearing wouldn't be injured. It was already not there. So, but this was a teaching position for an educated man was a good job. He just wasn't getting paid the same amount of money as the rest of the people in his building. And I guess there really wasn't much he could do about it back then. Today we have equal rights and laws and all this kind of stuff. But back then, if you didn't have money or means to pursue a legal thing, then that was it. We also have the beginning of another storyline that will be, it's addressed in the beginning of the book, it's addressed at the end of the book, and it will be addressed in future books. It will lead to a huge storyline way down the road. Another 5 or 6 books, I think it'll be, before the storyline takes center stage. But Catherine, the little girl, is watching. They're all in the backyard. Mrs. Ellsworth and Sarah and Catherine and Maeve are in the backyard, and they're doing a little gardening, and they're cutting the flowers. And Maeve has the garden shears, and for whatever reason, Catherine spots the shears and loses it, and screams her bloody brains out about the bad people. So that's like the one little snippet that you get as to the reason why she had originally stopped talking when she was at the mission. So it'll be mentioned again, but they really don't know an explanation. It'll take a few books for that storyline to play out. So Frank gets summoned to Captain O'Brien's office, and then he goes back to Wooten's office to talk to the young clerk. The clerk informs Frank that while the partner Young wasn't there, his son Terry was, and Terry was on the premises the same day that Wooten was killed. And I love Mrs. Ellsworth, and I'm going to do a whole podcast on her in the next, after 20-something books. I'll wait till we get a good enough material to do 5 or 6 minutes. But I love Mrs. Ellsworth. She's just the absolute best, and I've got to talk to her about her. The best thing about this time of year is the fresh fruit, Mrs. Ellsworth was saying as she pulled a pie out of the oven. I have never had peach pie before, Maeve said, inhaling the delicious aroma. I never even saw enough peaches at once to make a pie. I love peaches, Catherine informed them all, looking up from the half-eaten one she was cradling in her hands. I do too, Sarah said with a smile. They were all gathering in the kitchen, and Mrs. Ellsworth had spent the morning helping the girls peel and slice the fruit she'd gotten at the Gansevoort market that morning and bake it into pies. Look how many pies we got, Maeve said, looking at the collection they had cooling on the flat surface in the room. Can you count them, Catherine, and tell me how many we have? Oh no, Mrs. Ellsworth exclaimed in alarm. You mustn't count them once they've come out of the oven. They'll all go bad. Sarah and Maeve exchanged a glance, but Sarah decided not to scold her neighbor for her superstition. Well, however many we have, what are we going to do with them all? Maeve wondered. Maybe you can take some to Mr. Malloy and Brian, Mrs. Ellsworth suggested. I'm sure Mr. Malloy's mother would be insulted, Sarah reminded her. All the more reason, Mrs. Ellsworth replied with a twinkle, making Maeve laugh. We don't, dear Miss Ellsworth is just teasing, Sarah replied with a warning look at the older woman. That's right, I am, Mrs. Ellsworth assured her. It's not nice to tease people, Catherine informed them gravely. It's not nice to tease people. They heard the doorbell and everyone looked up with varying degrees of disappointment. The doorbell usually meant Sarah was being summoned to work. I didn't tell you this morning, but I saw 4 crows on the fence when I came out my back door, Mrs. Ellsworth said apologetically. That always means a birth. And it does. So, Frank is back at the Wootens, and he's questioning the Wootens about the father, and he's asking them all these different questions. And he's in the middle of questioning Mrs. Wooten, and her water breaks. And the whole world is just standing there looking at this woman going, what the F? Because Mrs. Wooten did not tell anyone she was with child, and because she's a little on the heavier side, no one noticed the little extra weight gain. And while they're doing all this, Frank talks to he has Sarah come to the house to handle the delivery, and they're like, "You know a midwife?" And he's like, "Yeah, I know a midwife. I didn't write the page down." Um, and they didn't believe that she was Sarah Decker's daughter, and the whole 9 yards. It was a cute scene. And he's talking. Then Frank goes and talks to Electra, and Electra, she wanted to help to learn sign language so she could talk to people. And I do some of these signs. I'm just trying to how. When I learned it, it was how, but now it's like this. I don't know why, but I'm pretty sure it was how way back when. So maybe they just closed it, but I'm used to going like this. How are you? Fine, good. So she doesn't tell her father. Her father is so against her learning sign language, and I don't understand why it would matter. She's still learning how to lip read. She can learn to sign and learn how to lip read. She could do both together. I do not know what her father's problem was, but she discovers that her brother Leander was paying the deaf teacher to instruct his sister in sign language, and no one knew about the baby. Leander's eyes widened in surprise. Electra's teacher? Why would he want to kill father? Because your father didn't want Electra to marry a deaf man. Marry? What are you talking about? Electra isn't going to marry anyone. She's too young. She's only 16. She's almost as old as your mother was when she married your father. What does that have to do with anything? Electra's still a child. Adam Oldham doesn't think so. What does that mean? It means he asked her to marry him. Leander lunged to his feet, ready to battle. That son of a... Frank pushed him back down in his chair. For someone so large, she was surprisingly easy to push around. What did you think would happen when your sister started sneaking her out to meet him? He was supposed to teach her sign language, Leander insisted. He's old enough to be her father. He's not that old. Well, he's a lot older than she is, old enough to know better than to. Oh my God, did he seduce her? What if he... You better wait until you know for sure, Frank cautioned him. And this time Leander sat down back of his own accord. How did this all happen? He asked of no one in particular, putting his hands in his head as if afraid it might fly into pieces if he didn't hold it together. So it seems that Mr. Oldham wanted to marry your sister and your father didn't approve. Of course he didn't. He would have been furious, Leander assured him. He would have sent this Oldham packing and make sure he never got a teaching job anywhere in the country. Could he have really done that? Frank asked. Of course he could. My father is a very powerful man. If he told the faculty at the deaf schools not to hire him, they wouldn't have. And then he gets to meet his little brother, and he's like, oh my God. And Mrs. Wooten goes through some stuff. It's really disturbing. She, at first, after the child's born, she's telling Sarah to kill it, then she's telling Sarah to give it up, then she's telling Sarah to put it in an orphanage, and she's telling all this stuff. And Sarah's like, just explain to everybody that you weren't, because you had a stillbirth in the past, you didn't want to tell everybody and get everybody all excited in case you had another stillbirth, and that the child is, of course, your husband's. No one has to know that you weren't in the same bedroom with your husband for the last 20 years. But, she eventually talks Mrs. Wooten down. And so then Mrs. Wooten's sister-in-law, Mrs. Palmer, adds her up the yin yang and causes a whole bunch of trouble. And sometimes I'm not sure whether to like Mrs. Palmer or hate Mrs. Palmer, because Mrs. Palmer, she causes a lot of trouble. And then Leander explains to his mother, although it's never proven and never addressed, that his father had changed the will to make Leander his executor. But it's never really discussed, never proven, or never becomes a matter of pertinence in the thing. Mrs. Wooten is trusting in Sarah. She makes Sarah go to the funeral because she's in bed recovering. And so Sarah goes and does all the spying for her. And then Frank said he was in Wooten's office and there was something about the books that bothered him. He had seen the ledgers and they were just sitting on Wooten's desk. So Sarah says, get the books and take them to her father's company, this guy Cooley, and he'll look at them. And they do look at them. Just a sec. So he takes the books to Felix Decker's office, and Collier looks at him, and he finds some disturbing information. And Mr. Young comes and sees his son. There's another death. Someone else is murdered. So you'll have to, I'm not going to spoil the whodunit, but the finger gets pointed at several different people, and it could be anybody. And there's 2 murders, and I won't tell you who the second person is. You can read the book for yourself. But it could have been who murdered Mr. Wooten. It could have been the teacher. It could have been the business partner. It could have been the business partner's son. Because at some point, the business partner confesses and the business partner's son confesses. They're both kind of covering for the other one. There's several different people involved in this. And always got to go off during a podcast. Oh, good. No binging. But anyways, I wanted to read the little note at the end because as I enjoy the books, and these notes from Victoria get longer as the books go on, and I really enjoy them. Many thanks to all those who have written to me with information about the deaf and their unique issues. Some have shared historical information they learned from family members, and others have simply shared their personal stories or those of loved ones. All were grateful that I included a deaf character in the Gaslight Mystery series. I've learned more about this subject through the years I've been writing this series, and I felt the time had come to address it. My research taught me many things I didn't know, especially about the movement in the late 19th and earliest 20th century to eliminate the teaching of American Sign Language in favor of teaching deaf children to speech read and speak. The theories I attributed to Alexander Graham Bell were actually his. He dedicated a great portion of his life and personal fortune to advance them, and he had a great success in doing so, very nearly eliminating the teaching of ASL. I think ASL is very, very important. You can go, I think, I could be wrong. I could totally, absolutely be wrong here. But it's my belief that sign language is the best way to go, with speech reading as a backup. If you can learn how to speech read, most excellent. But I'm just saying, as far as I know, and I could be wrong, but as far as I know, sign language is universal. Father, mother, son, brother, sister, girl, boy, mother, mother, and then one for grandmother and another one for great-grandmother, and father, and then grandfather. Or hi. Hi is hi in every single language in the world. Hi, hello, hi. No matter which country you go to, this is hi. I like it. Like, there are certain signs the alphabets may be different, but if you go to another country and you're a speech reader and the people in the other country don't speak English, but if you find some deaf people, there are some signs. All right, this finger spelling may be different, and I'm not sure how you would finger spell Japanese letters, but beside the point. Majority of the signs are the same, I believe. I could be wrong, but that's my thing. So it would be a universal language. And yeah, do speech reading as a backup. But I didn't realize how prevalent, when I learned that this young lady was never exposed to sign language until after she was in college. Like, how could you go through all that time period and not be exposed to sign language? I just don't get it. I was really upset for this lady. I don't think it bothered her none. But it opens up a whole nother world, a whole nother community, friends and associates, people you have stuff in common with, people that you can talk to and have discussions and learn how they are and ask how and what and where and why and do you understand and speak and lip read and oh, he's cute or I see you. It opens up an entire world, and it fills in all the blanks with the speech reading. And I think it's just I didn't realize it was still going on. I thought, when I first read this book way back when, I was like, oh, but now that I've seen the videos about people today that were only taught to lip read because their parents were hearing, and it was the convenient thing for their parents to just have the kid learn to lip read when they could have actually done an equal, given it a 50-50 shot and do both. Because I think you should do both. I could fill in the blanks. If they miss something with the speech reading, then they can pick it up with the signing. I think they should do both. But anyways, if you could please check out Star Trek recaps on Fridays, Star Trek Next Generation recaps. My If Then episode, if you like this author, then maybe you like that author. We did the Bridgertons. If you like the Bridgertons, then maybe you like Joanna Lindsay's Mallory's, Stephanie Lawrence Sinster's, and Mary Bailow's got a series out there. There's a whole bunch of different series out there, and I did an If Then. We've done a Patricia Cornwell, and we're going to do another forensics, because I have since found a ton of forensics since that video aired. It happens that when you stop looking for something, you actually find them. I did a homicide. I spent a month looking for homicide. Did a homicide If Then, and after it aired, I found a slew of the ones I was looking for in the first place. Over it. So please hit the like and subscribe. Let me know I'm doing a good job. Thank you.